The way that individuals with ADHD or autism communicate is not actually wrong. What we're seeing when we say that we're struggling with social skills or social communication, we're seeing a translation issue.
Yeah.
We're like trying to put out all of these behavioral fires when they aren't the problem.
Yeah.
And in fact, what you're seeing when you're seeing big ADHD symptoms is you're seeing a dysregulated nervous system. If we do this right, we aren't having the disruptive things we're worried about because the plan is working.
Welcome to the Art of ADHD. I'm your host, Liam Danger Park. On today's episode, we're meeting with Erica Nielsen Mahoney, an ADHD coach and an education doctoral candidate who specializes in helping families navigate ADHD. In this episode, we explore how people with ADHD can become more involved with their education and how to capitalize on our interests to live a fulfilling life. If you're a parent or educator or have ADHD yourself, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Thank you so much for joining me today, Erica. I'm excited to chat.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you're a coach, you work with people with ADHD,
Yes.
and you're doing an educational, you just told me a moment ago, educational
Doctorate. Yes.
That's, like school's a challenge for a lot of people with ADHD.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you're schooling about schooling.
I am schooling about schooling and specifically looking at ADHD learners and ADHD students and how we can support them in educational settings.
I think that's really cool. It's one of the recent conversations I had was with Nigel Metcalf, who I think you know. He's a local educator who does like an alternative schooling thing.
Yes. My older daughter, my 11-year-old, actually is in his program.
Okay.
And so she is in a blended learning program and is part at home with me and then part in person outdoors with his program, which has been a really amazing balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool to explore what education can look like for an ADHD mind.
Yes.
Because I had this analogy come to me today that was sort of like, a lot of people have a lot of shame and guilt about their educational experiences, especially with ADHD. They're like, oh, I suck at school, whatever. But it's like if you put a goldfish in a tank full of chicken broth, it might not do well, even though the chicken broth is
100%.
full of nutrients.
Yeah.
Right? That's not where a goldfish is supposed to live.
No, 100%. Yeah, I like that. In general, I find that, I always say there's a great quote out there by Dr. William Dodson, who's an ADHD sort of writer, speaker, and he says that people with ADHD have interest-based nervous systems as opposed to importance-based nervous systems. And I always love that because it's so true. It is kids and adults with ADHD. We get turned on by things we're interested in that are novel and new and challenging and connected, but not always how important they are. Yeah. And when we are in school environments where others are deciding what is important, what we're going to learn, when we don't have something that our ADHD brain just grabs onto, we struggle. Yeah. And the areas of struggle for ADHD, which are the big three I always talk about, are executive functioning, motivation, and overwhelm. When we're in a school environment and we have to use all of our executive functions, so getting started, making decisions, following things through, prioritizing, regulating our emotions, and we have to be motivated, and we have to manage such an overwhelming setting, we struggle often. Yeah. And so these sort of different environments, like the one that Nigel's leading at Heartwood, where they're outside and they just finished, my daughter, 11-year-old, has ADHD, and they just finished these inquiry projects where they picked a topic of interest. And so they're focusing on these high interest things, which I've seen a lot more success in her in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my great gifts in managing my own ADHD is like I'm interested in the phenomena of interest.
Yes.
So when I'm disinterested in something, I can be kind of interested in my disinterest, which is
I like that. Yeah.
It's a weird little hack that I think has served me well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, tell me more about this because like the regular school system is so much like go here, do this, do that, and that's not well oriented towards an interest-based
No.
attention.
And I mean, there's things we can do to adapt and support and accommodate. And part of what I'm specifically looking at is student autonomy and student agency within ADHD support planning. And so we often have these kids with ADHD, they're in these environments where they have to do things that are uninteresting or boring or executive functioning heavy and manage their impulses, and it can be a real struggle. And then we also have these support plans, but sometimes these support plans aren't tailored to the actual kid they're supposed to serve and support. And an example of that is often breaks are a part of accommodation plans. So kids can take breaks. We know we need that for ADHD, but if the break plan hasn't been created with the child, they might not access it. So a common one I see is that the child has to ask permission to take the break, which makes them feel like they stand out. They don't want to stand out, so they never take their break. So we have these cycles of support plans that kids won't actually use because they don't meet their preferences in some way. And so my sort of intention with my research is to look at how can we support teachers and train teachers into how to include children with ADHD so their voice is a part of their educational plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know I had ADHD growing up, and I feel lucky that somehow I was empowered to feel engaged. Like
Yeah.
I was too bored in the back of the class, so I would sit in the front and I would engage. And most
Awesome.
people didn't ask questions, so I would because I wanted to be.
Wanted to know.
I wanted to know,
Absolutely.
and that would help me do well and
stay
like
focused.
and to sort of build rapport with the teacher, so that if I did need to negotiate something, I was like, "Look, this isn't working." You know, they knew me as the person who participated anyway, so I could
That's awesome.
actually do something.
Yeah. And I also didn't find out that I had ADHD myself until adulthood. I was actually a couple degrees deep before I figured it out. And then all of a sudden, it was actually through the process of getting my daughter diagnosed that, and at that point, my career had shifted towards behavior. And I was kind of sitting with okay, this does sound fairly familiar, and went through the process myself. But yeah, it took... And in my own journey in school, I was very sort of inconsistent. So it would be some years when I had that strong connection with the teacher, when I was interested, when especially relationship based, I would just do really, really well. And then years where I felt disconnected in the classroom, I would struggle and procrastinate and all of those classic sort of ADHD moves. And but then in adulthood kind of found my niche in education, and then just kept going and going and going, which I do see in adults that I work with. It's kind of, I always say ADHD is very all or nothing. So we're either fully in on whatever topic we are into, and maybe we go do all of the school, or school wasn't a good fit and we kind of back off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you cope before you knew you had ADHD? If you made it a couple degrees deep, like what was going on?
A big piece was sort of following my interest. Another was a lot of coping strategies that maybe weren't the healthiest. I am a really good hyperfocuser. And so there was definitely a lot of 12-hour hyperfocus sessions, forgetting to eat or drink, or that I had a body, and kind of come out of this fugue state and like, oh, my back hurts. So there was a lot of that. My first year, I tell this to adult clients I work with as well, because now I have multiple degrees and I've done well with them. But my first degree, I switched several times. So I started in sciences and almost failed out of university completely. Then I came back into the faculty of music and ended up with a 4.0 GPA. And then the next year I switched into education, and then I stayed there. But I think looking back now, it was very much university, living on my own for the first time without all of the supports and structure that my parents had created, just kind of, and a topic that I thought I loved. Turns out I just really loved my high school science teachers, didn't love science so much, crashed and burned, found something I loved, went that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's changed in your study habits now?
Now that I have a lot of strategies, I do a lot of scheduling. I also do body doubling. In my doctorate right now, I have a cohort with 2 other students in the program, and we actually meet every single week, and we set deadlines for each other, and we text through the week, and we send each other progress on our assignments. And that helps to keep me accountable. So it's very much using things outside of the actual structure to hold my accountability. I also use digital tools. If I have online lectures, I like to record them and run them through transcription software because I find that I retain information more effectively when I'm reading as opposed to listening. So I do that a lot. Anytime there's verbal information, even podcasts, I run those through transcription software all the time so I can read them later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty nerdy. But I get it. Yeah, like it's good to hack your mind.
Yeah.
One of the things you pointed to that I think is interesting with the interest-based thing is scheduling.
Yes.
I remember as a youth, every year at school they'd give me an agenda, and for the first month or two while they were checking it, I would maybe sometimes use it.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't. And it wasn't until, like a few years into an ADHD journey that I really was like, oh, I could be interested in a schedule.
Yeah.
But most people, especially if they're new to the idea they have ADHD, if you say use a schedule, they're kind of like not interested.
Yes.
How did you get interest in a schedule?
So the thing with schedules I find in ADHD is that they feel very restrictive and demanding, which we don't like, but yet they keep and hold our lives together, which we do like. And so I feel like schedules in general, there's this like emotional push-pull relationship with people with ADHD and schedules. We tend to struggle, I find, with demands in general. So a schedule can feel really demanding and restrictive. Like we've put our life into this little box.
Yeah.
But also, we don't feel time, and so we get lost without one. And our working memory isn't always awesome, so we're dropping thoughts and on side quests, and so we need them. What I have found is, in general, and when I work with adult clients as well, is creating a weekly rhythm, first of all, so that the more aspects of our life that can be just sort of a predictable rhythm, as opposed to like a tightly scheduled routine or schedule where it's like 9 to 10 I do this, 11 to 12 it's more okay, my days flow, I do these things in the same order every day. Or in a week it is I always do laundry on Sundays because that's a ADHD nightmare. And so by putting it as a part of the rhythm, we don't need to put it on a schedule, or maybe we create one visual with what our weekly rhythm looks like, and then we only use our schedule for things that aren't a part of the rhythm.
Yeah.
So it's not as intense and overwhelming.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the strategies I found is like really helpful is like a weekly brain dump, or a few, like a categorized brain dump, like because if I just approach like a standard calendar or scheduler and it's like just gives you the days Monday through Sunday, and it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna mow the lawn on Wednesday. I can't commit to that. I don't know why, but maybe I know I need to mow the lawn.
Yes.
If you've seen the lawn, you know it's actually like that's a bad example because I really haven't done it in a while. But yeah, no, I needed to get it done, and it's easier for me to put it in a brain dump.
Yes.
Than assign it to a day.
Yes.
And then like have that page so every day when I do look at the planner, if the day is pretty open and I got some time, I'm like, what's in the brain dump?
Yeah.
And then I can do things. But yeah, if you try to pre-commit
to everything, and that's why I often like choices, and most adult clients that I work with, we use a similar thing to that, where it's like you have your general to-do list and then you have your rhythm where your day flows with a chunk of productivity. And in the productivity, you go look at your brain dump and think, okay, what can I fit into here? So sort of like creating an overall sort of flow or shape to your day to kind of keep things in line. Because I find if there's nothing in a schedule, ADHD brains also struggle too, because if we have nothing tethering us in place, we do this thing where we just kind of like wander around, not sure what to do.
Yeah.
Kids do it too. It's so funny. They just kind of walk around because there's too many choices. So it's all about reducing the amount of choices and creating some structure so it doesn't feel overwhelming and overloading, while also not feeling too restrictive. It's a dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this seems like the theme of this paper you sent me is like this autonomy, and that is quite a dance because we got this problem where like we need structure.
Yes.
We don't like it imposed on us.
Yes.
Sometimes even by ourselves.
100%.
Like
100%.
So how do you help someone to use their agency to actually do this without feeling like, they're micromanaging themselves?
So it's often freedom with limitations, or freedom with sort of boundaries or bumpers or something to kind of hold it in place. In general, school in particular, there's lots of schedule and rhythm already. It is offering choices within that. So, and a big piece of it is also teaching children about their ADHD brain. So helping them to recognize when they're feeling dysregulated. What does that feel like? When I work with kids, I'm often asking them, okay, what does it feel like before you're impulsive, before you get yourself in trouble? What's going on in your body? Are you moving around? Do you feel it in your belly? Are you making a fist? Like, where do you feel it? What does that feel like? Okay, when we're feeling that feeling, what can we do? And offering choices in that moment, and also helping them to understand, okay, I struggle when I have no choices.
Yeah.
But if I have too many choices, or if it's infinite, that's too much.
Yeah.
And so helping them to start to advocate for themselves, to say, I need a list of 5 choices.
Yeah.
If their teacher says, you can study anything. Even with my own daughter, I mentioned the inquiry project earlier. I didn't just say, go pick something you're interested in, because she would be completely frozen and overwhelmed. Instead, we looked at the grade 6 curriculum, and we looked at the criteria for her project. We actually ran both of them through ChatGPT and asked for a list of suggested topics. She read all of those, thought about it, went away, came back and said, I want to study the brain.
Yeah.
And she studied the brain and created a great project. But if it had been complete openness, she wouldn't have picked a topic. She would have been overwhelmed. She would have been overloaded. She would have been frozen. There would have been a full-on stress response.
Yeah.
Probably maybe some big emotions around it too. And so it's knowing that both teachers and kids, the more they can understand this whole, we need flexibility and choice while also having structure. Similar to like writing an essay, for example. If we tell a kid to just write an essay, that's big. But if we give them a graphic organizer with like boxes, okay, this is what you do in the intro. Then we're going to have 3 points, and we have those boxes, and then they can go have the freedom to fill them how they want, but there's a shape.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's handy. I've been working on a thing with ChatGPT, a sort of a book, and just getting it to interview me to help me work on an outline, instead of like, I don't want it to write the whole book. I like to write.
Yeah.
But there's
and
a
that's
lot.
where Gen AI is great. And when I'm working with high school students or university students, that's always what I recommend using AI for, is take all of your ideas, then throw it through AI and ask AI, what am I trying to say? Can you help give me 3 possible outlines from this material? Then you go and write it yourself. The point is not to get Gen AI to write things for you, but it's a great organizational tool, which is where we struggle.
Yeah. And I think it's like what we're describing is like, it's sort of a cultural and societal issue too. And over the last half century, certainly probably a little bit longer now, almost a century. I don't know how long. It's been a while. We've really just opened up like life to whatever. And of course, right? Like no one really needs a blacksmith anymore. So you're not going to like go down the traditional path.
Yes.
But sometimes like the sheer volume of choices, like, oh, I could get into this really niche marketing thing, or I think our culture is almost fostering a pathological relationship with choice.
Yes, I agree. Which makes it challenging for these kids that are trying to figure out, what do we want to do? And it is unclear. I always say, in general, ADHD, anytime something is infinite, it's the same reason when we have no schedule at all and we wake up in the morning and there's just an unlimited choice of things to do, we end up doom scrolling and not leaving the couch because it was too overwhelming to look at the infinite possibilities. And so always what I'm trying to encourage teachers and parents and kids to do is to just like help make some of the decisions, because every decision we make creates that narrowing to make things look more concrete and be more manageable.
Yeah. And I think like in this postmodern culture, there's sort of like not a guiding ethos. So like in some ways, like, you can intellectualize about religious things and be like, I don't know if that makes sense or not. But if you can like, okay, here's the principle I live my life on.
Yes.
I want to ease the suffering of my fellow man and whatever. Then suddenly it's like, okay, I can work on this, and this is a way my talents might move to that.
Absolutely.
Whereas like with the infinite possibilities, like, well, is the purpose of my life entertainment? If it is, well, I got Netflix, video games, or is it, what is it? You know, because there is no central pillar in our culture right now, it feels like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It does. It just makes it challenging. In general, too, I always say when trying to like help kids or adults try to figure out where to go is look for what your special interests are. Because with ADHD, we're interest based, and most of us have special interests. Mine happens to be ADHD, which is convenient as a parent and for my career. But the more we can kind of focus on these niche interests and kind of stay in that realm, we are continually motivated, continually able to grow, and we just kind of stay engaged. Yeah.
I think that's really powerful insight that a lot of people don't get enough of. Like, I think growing up, I feel like almost like I had a shame about how, you know, especially like I said, being interested in interest itself.
Yeah.
I was almost ashamed of my wandering interests. But like, if someone's finds something they're interested in, like really, and they got the ADHD brain, then they're going to commit themselves so much more to that than many people, and they'll undoubtedly achieve at a high level. Like,
absolutely.
If you're, you know, like there's not a lot of, you know, you don't need to be interested in the things your parents think you should be interested in, your school thinks you should be interested in. If you go out and look, there are people achieving at the highest level in thousands of fields you've never even heard of
100%.
because someone had a special interest.
Yeah. Well, and it's fostering those and recognizing whatever your special interest is. That's awesome, and whatever, and that there are possibilities within that. The wandering interest thing made me think of the fact that often with adults, a topic that's come up in coaching is I need a hobby. And what a lot of people with ADHD don't realize is that our hobby is often problem solving. And so when I think of you saying, well, my interest was interest, and it just made me think of that because it's such a common thing. And it's like, oh no, the hobby is actually figuring out different hobbies. It is like researching, diving down the rabbit hole, buying all the supplies, figuring everything out. And then when it comes time to do the hobby, it's like, no, this isn't very interesting. And because what the actual interest often is for ADHD is interest, problem solving, figuring things out. That is usually what lights us up more than anything else. And so when you say your interest is interest, that it kind of made me think of that. I'm like, yeah, that is what it is for so many of us.
Yeah.
And we instead will think, oh, I failed because I've figured out another hobby and now I'm not doing it. Well, no, you successfully continued on your hobby quest, which is problem solving things.
Yeah. Yeah, like a year or two ago, I knit 2 sweaters, my first 2 knitting projects, and I've hardly knit since because I'm like, well,
you figured it out.
I've mastered it.
Yeah, you mastered it. That's no fun anymore. Yeah. Well, and most of us have closets full of different projects and crafts and different deep dives we've gone into. With my second child, I got really into cloth diapering. I was like measuring the hardness of the water, the pH. I figured all of it out. It's all rattling around back there. But it's what kept me entertained during maternity leave.
Yeah. So there is like a dark side to this too, though, where like, you know, a common thing I've seen, especially in the man space online, might not be as important for you in teaching kids, hopefully not, is like porn addiction. Like obviously that's hijacking our interest-based nervous system.
Yes.
Or of course drug addictions can be hijacking or like video games. Like there's a lot of ways this interest-based nervous system can like when I say lean into your interests, like, well, what if you just
and it's in the addiction space, it's also tying into dopamine regulation too, right? And regulation. And so in my adult coaching practice, I've had lots of conversations around porn addictions, sex addiction, alcohol, all substances. I've probably talked to somebody about it. And it is common because I always say anything that gives us dopamine without great executive functioning effort and is regulating is a possible coping tool and a potential to have an addictive relationship with an ADHD. And that's something that we see quite a bit, because anything that feels good on a sensory level, gives us dopamine, can become a hyperfixation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we like know if our interest is healthy? Because like sometimes some of them are obvious, like, oh yeah, you probably shouldn't be looking at porn all the time or drinking booze all the time. But some of them, like video games, for example. I don't really play video games.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was a little too addicted when I did, so I just decided not to, and they're expensive, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
But some people, like, it's a legitimate career for them. They're actually making money, and they're making friendships, like, internationally. And it's like, sometimes it feels like maybe that's a good thing, and maybe it's not. And some of these hyperfixations seem like, is this good? Is it bad? How do you help someone navigate that?
We look at impact.
Yeah.
So we look at impact on their goals, relationships, and how they feel about it and themselves, typically, is how you start to differentiate. So you have to separate from the moment and look at, okay, number one, look at how do you feel before, during, and after.
Yeah.
And then what impact is it having on the things you really care about, the people you care about, and your goals for life. And so if it is derailing any of those things or impacting those things, then it is worth having a look at and some support around, typically.
And what are you looking for? Like, because I'm thinking there's complex situations. Like, say someone's raised in a family of alcoholics and they decide to stop drinking. Well, that's hurting their relationships. There are situations where even if you're doing the right thing, it might actually, you might feel shame about it. You might be alienating yourself from your peers.
100%. And it is more, the goal is in general, is for you to feel in control of the decisions you're making. And that's the big piece with anything sort of impulsivity related and addiction related is, are you in control or is this other thing in control? And so stepping back, having that thoughtful conversation, and often a conversation with a support person of some kind, to figure out, well, what do I actually want?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It might impact relationships negatively, but what do you want with your agency as a human to be this relationship with this substance or this thing?
Yeah.
And sometimes that involves changing your relationship with it. I have a client recently who moved from smoking pot all the time to just after a certain period of time, right? Like after a certain time at night. So it's now an evening thing, not a full day thing. ADHD brains do well with rules and creating structure around something. And that is creating a healthier relationship with all kinds of things in his life. But it wasn't a total abstinence prohibition thing where he gave it up completely. And that is entirely possible. It's more looking at, often when it is something addictive and real hyperfixation, there is a lack of control in how you feel. And the goal is to feel in control, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've been in one of my major hyperfixations over the years has been like historical stuff. Like I'm interested in philosophy and historians, and I feel like our culture doesn't talk much about things like virtue and honor, but what you just described is the virtue of temperance.
Yeah.
And I relate with that because I don't drink, but I don't not drink. Some people, they're abstinent, they don't drink.
Yeah.
I've just, through my own introspection, found that I don't really like the feeling of it.
Yeah.
I don't really like the cost of it. There's a lot of issues with it, but I do really love a novel flavor. So I'm not like, never ever, because sometimes something's on a menu, I'm like, that sounds pretty cool. Probably like twice a year, I'll be like, I'll drink that.
Yeah.
That's temperance. But in the mental health space, in the culture space, there's other than little niches, there's not a lot of talk of these things like virtue and
I agree.
Has any of that been instrumental in your study or your development?
I think without actually looking at it in that way, I do think so. I think because what you're saying kind of connects to often what I am doing with humans is helping to build connection, agency, self-control, regulation. Overall just want people to feel like they are the drivers of their own lives, whatever that looks like, which does kind of tie into what you're saying, I think. But I haven't looked at it through that lens. I like that.
Yeah. Like psychology as a science is brand new.
Yeah.
But if you like read a little bit of like what Socrates was talking about, or like a lot of other historical, Marcus Aurelius, like the Stoics are sort of they've been doing pretty well for themselves over the last decade or two. Yeah. But like what they discuss is a lot about how to like manage your mind. How to feel more productive. How to
feel in control, how to manage yourself, how to live honorable lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see any of that discussed in the education space? Like,
sometimes, yes, there is work out there. I feel like the hard thing with the educational space right now is so much of the research is about like survival and like especially in the ADHD space, it is how to react to. It is that deficit-oriented narrative where we are trying to cope with challenging behavior. We're trying to cope with disruption, when my intention is that if we preempt all of that and the teacher understands ADHD and the kid understands their own brain, we're not seeing the challenging behavior because they're engaged.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was even trying to explain that to someone recently is they were like, well, should you go in and observe behavior? And I'm like, well, I hope that there's no behavior, because if we do this right, we aren't having the disruptive things we're worried about because the plan is working.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of so much of what we're looking at is behavioral plans that are dealing with sort of the after, or preventing a specific thing, which is more of a symptom. Whereas instead, if we can engage kids to feel empowered and competent and connected, then we're not having to put out fires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a topic I've brought up a few times, is that I've been wrestling with a lot over the last couple of years, is sort of the pathologization of the ADHD brain.
Yeah.
Because it's in the name. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Yes.
And yeah, in a lot of contexts, it can feel pretty disruptive. It can feel like a disorder.
Yeah.
And in other contexts, it can feel empowering and like an advantage. Mm-hmm. How do we, like, do you have any sense of like how we can like keep our understanding of ADHD and get rid of that pathological piece?
I feel like some of the research, even using the term neurodiversity, and the intention behind the neurodiversity movement is this idea that we do have different brains. Yeah. The hard part, I think, right now is a lot of our structures we've set up are more suited to a neurotypical brain as opposed to a neurodivergent brain. But I think starting to normalize, there's also some great research out there on communication and how the way that individuals with ADHD or autism communicate is not actually wrong or a problem or a deficit. It is just different. And what we're seeing when we say that we're struggling with social skills or social communication, we're seeing a translation issue more than anything else. Because I don't know if you've found this, but often with ADHD, talking to someone else with ADHD, we understand each other just fine. Yeah. We can follow each other's rabbit holes. I talk to people with ADHD all day long, and I can understand what they're communicating just fine. And they're like, but how come my spouse can't understand this, or why can't my whoever understand this? And I'm like, no, it's a translation issue. And even a classic example of this is that when someone is sharing a story to someone with ADHD, a really key way that people with ADHD connect is by sharing their own story.
Yeah.
So what they're actually doing is they're hearing the story, and then they're thinking of a similar situation from their lives and saying, "Oh, hey, I know how you feel.
Yeah.
I'm going to connect with you and tell you about my story." Whereas someone who doesn't understand that pattern of communication might think, "Hey, you're taking over with your thing.
Yeah.
We were talking about me. Why are we talking about you?" Whereas the individual with ADHD is just saying like, "I feel you. I hear you. Let me show you how I know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And so, which is a translation issue.
Yeah.
Both humans are trying to connect, but it's a different language. It's a different pattern, if that makes sense. And so I think a big piece is really working on that translation.
Yeah.
Just like ADHD brains, there's no problem. It's not that motivation doesn't work. It's that motivation is different. It gets turned on by different things.
Yeah.
It's often, it's not that the system can't work. It's that we have to, I think, include more understanding of all of these different sort of patterns, languages, communication, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much to that. Like, I feel like here, just side tangent. I took the Big 5 personality test. I don't know much about it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that stood out to me was I think in like the bottom 5% of politeness. I scored incredibly low on politeness.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a surprise to me. Not a surprise to my wife, but it was a surprise to me because what I think this test is measuring as politeness is different than what I see as politeness. To me, the politeness is like, I trust you enough that I can be direct and honest with you, and that you're going to be able to handle that.
Yes.
And sometimes it's going to be offensive, and sometimes it's going to be playful, and it's not necessarily going to be too earnest.
Yeah.
And that apparently doesn't come across well with everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that it totally connects. And it often is even like talking about social skills. Like, I find working with ADHD kids is really just explaining the rules, explaining, okay, this is how your brain would prefer it. This is how some other people prefer it. Watch body language, see how they respond. And like, it's okay to try different things, to experiment. Our goal is that the more kids even understand, the more that they can communicate when they do get themselves in trouble sometimes, where someone didn't understand or misunderstood, to be able to say, hey, this is how my brain works.
Yeah.
That's not what I intended.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the big tragedies of the institutional schooling structure that our culture has built, is this lack of communication. Because I think as an ADHD person, my best learning comes not through sitting and listening to someone, not through reading a book, not through watching YouTube videos. Like, I do love all of those things, but conversation is where it really comes to life for me. And I'm lucky enough to have been in a lot of situations where I got to converse with people. But regular school, teacher, students. And you get to talk when you've got like a little class project or when it's recess, but otherwise, be quiet, teacher's talking.
Yeah.
And that interpersonal dynamic, I think, wouldn't just help people with ADHD, but it would help the people who don't have ADHD understand us.
Absolutely. And even in ADHD especially, because of working memory, which is how many thoughts we can hold at a time, we have a fairly short input-output cycle, which means that for everything that comes in, we have to get something out to engage with it, to try to get it into long-term memory. And so if we're just sitting and listening and there's nothing coming out, we aren't engaging with material at all, we aren't absorbing it. We absorb like the first bit or the middle bit or maybe the end bit, but we're not going to absorb the whole thing unless we're asking those questions, because for everything that goes in, we want something to go out, and then we have played with the information and we're more likely to store it in long-term memory, and then we can move on to the next thing. And so, I think in general, just more conversation, but even also just communicating about, this is how I prefer things. Yeah. I found it very interesting. I've been with my husband for 18 years now, and I didn't know I had ADHD when we first started dating and when we got married. And now there's so much communication and understanding. And then now we have 2 neurodivergent kids, which makes it which is wonderful because he's understood so much about me because he is not neurodivergent, the opposite really. But it's the communication of like, oh, Erica needs it this way and I prefer it this way. So this is how we're going to figure things out.
Yeah.
Being able to communicate about these things is really important.
Yeah. So how do you do that? Because a lot of people take things personally. Like I think that's one of the big struggles is taking things personally or making assumptions about what someone thinks or feels. How can we get better at communicating our needs or, understanding the needs of others?
Starting by actually understanding our needs, first of all, I think being able to name why you're struggling is the biggest first step to supporting, I think, all individuals, but being able to say like, wow, I feel dysregulated right now because I don't like transitions, or like, there's a weird sound that's bothering me, and saying it to ourselves first and then starting to say it out loud.
Yeah.
Because the more you say it out loud, the more people can understand and empathize. If you are just dysregulated and irritable, someone might take that offense or assume you're mad at them, or all kinds of assumptions can be made. But instead, if you say, I am so overstimulated because I planned way too many things today, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
It is a lot easier as the other human in the dynamic or the relationship to be like, oh yeah, go take a minute.
Yeah.
I think I think it starts with understanding ourselves, because I feel like with ADHD, especially when you're not diagnosed till adulthood, you don't know why you're irritable until you start learning about what dysregulates you and what overwhelms you and what overloads you. And then you can start using that language.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing though with parenting children with ADHD is that when you can get in there when they're kids, it's amazing. Because I know my own 2 kids can very clearly communicate their needs. And I do a lot of work with parents. I have like an online parenting membership community and a course for parents. And I feel like that is like the huge win.
Yeah.
Funny little aside story is my own 6-year-old had a really hard year in kindergarten. She wasn't understood, and we hadn't done all of her assessments yet, so we didn't fully understand yet at kindergarten, first year of school. We could assume there was some neurodivergence because of the genetic family history, but we did a lot of work over the summer, and she walked into grade 1 a week early to meet her teacher, and she goes right up to her teacher and she looks at her and she says, so I have this nervous system at 6. And she just kind of pauses, and her teacher's like, okay. She's like, and so sometimes I get stuck in my mad and sad, and then I need alone time. Is that okay with you? And her teacher was like, yes, absolutely, it's okay. And they sat down and they looked around the classroom and they figured out where she could have her alone time. And there was a little stuffy in there. And we're in December, we're 4 months in, and she's been having a fantastic year. And that's the perfect example of autonomy. It's the perfect example of communication, because she communicated her needs. She can feel when she's dysregulating, and she goes and takes her alone time, and she'll say, I need alone time. And she goes and she sits there, and it's completely her led. The teacher doesn't actually have to do anything other than make sure that that place is there and available. And if someone else is using that place, her backup plan is to go to the washroom and wash her hands, because that calms her down, because water works really well as a sensory tool. And so it's that if we can start doing it at 6, I'm excited for what she will be when she is my age, and being able to communicate her needs and accommodate herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just bringing my mind back to the culture and tradition thing, but to the Eastern traditions.
Yeah.
Like, I feel one of the best things that ever happened for me was before I knew I had ADHD, I went to this meditation retreat called Vipassana.
Okay.
It's a 10-day silent retreat.
Oh, wow.
Which, as you can imagine, with a brain like this, holy crap, like, it's really hard.
Yeah.
You sit quietly, you don't talk to anybody. You're not allowed to write. You're not allowed to exercise.
Yeah.
You do no outputs. It's very, very challenging, but helped me to notice the things that are going on in my body. Like, and I feel like, yeah, growing up, years of undiagnosed ADHD or just living in this culture, we kind of like tune out of our bodies in a lot. But through that, I learned like when I'd stay up real late, 'cause sometimes I hyper focus and I'd be up late. Eventually I was able to connect the dots and realize, oh, like that feels awful in my body.
Yes.
My blood feels like syrup. My skin is tingling. I've got knots in my stomach.
Yeah.
And then I was able to sort of rewind a little bit further and be like, okay, so what does it feel like before my blood turns to syrup?
Yes. 100%.
And yeah, being able to notice what's going on is so powerful. And like, that's something that schools don't typically provide. It's all like extrinsic and not much from the internal.
Yeah. And the goal in general, I think, is just, well, I always say it's a nervous system thing. It is helping our nervous system to feel calm and balanced as much as humanly possible is the biggest support tool. And that's where we're supposed to go first. And often instead we're like trying to put out all of these behavioral fires when they aren't the problem.
Yeah.
And in fact, nothing's the problem. It's more like what you're seeing when you're seeing big ADHD symptoms is you're seeing a dysregulated nervous system. So let's slow down. Let's back up. Let's look at the whole plan and slow things down. And it's also knowing that that can look different for different kids. I work in the field. I teach parents how to support neurodivergent kids. And I do different things for my kid. I have kids. I have one that's in a blended learning program because full-time school every day is too much for her.
Yeah.
She starts being way more symptomatic. She has physical anxiety symptoms when she's going to school every day. It's too much. And then I have another one that thrives in the routine of school, the rhythm of school, and the social stimulation is great as long as she has a supportive plan along with it. And so it is knowing that in different seasons, the plan can look different. I think for parents really trying to communicate that yeah, you can pick different things in different years. Different schools, different environments are going to support your child in different ways. I think I always recommend looking at school, education, the way we do life on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's make this tangible especially for parents. Yeah. A lot of people I've talked to on this podcast are parents. If they're wanting to support their ADHD kids and they probably have ADHD themselves, they might or might not have diagnosed.
Yeah.
Where do they, like, what are the first few steps to like trying to provide the best environment and space for your child to thrive?
Number one is learn everything you can about ADHD. So take a course, take a program, and start talking to other ADHD parents. I think forming community so you don't feel isolated is really important because it can be hard when you feel alone or that your child is different because they're not different. They are just have a differently wired brain than maybe some of their friends. So number one, learn what you can, find community. And then second, start to set up your life to support ADHD as best you can. And sort of the keys to that are number one, set expectations appropriately. So Dr. Barkley, an ADHD researcher, has this thing called the 30% rule. Have you ever heard that?
I can't remember.
Okay. So the 30% rule is for children. What we do is we take their age and we subtract 30%, and that is their executive functioning kind of age equivalent. Most kids with ADHD have average or above average intelligence. This is not how cognitively capable they are. This is executive functioning. So this is emotional regulation, impulsivity, making decisions, organization, getting started, all of those, the skills we need to do the things, we subtract 30%. So if we have a 9-year-old, cognitively, academically, they're a 9-year-old, maybe even above a 9-year-old, but their ability to keep track of their things, get out the door in the morning without forgetting their socks or losing their shoes or this or that or the other thing is more like a 6-year-old. So we want to set executive functioning expectations at the right level. Let's set ourselves up for success. And so that gap kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger through the middle and high school years, and then it starts to kind of shrink down again. Our executive functioning is always impacted with ADHD, but the gap feels extra big in those middle school years in particular, and the demand on executive functions really jumps then. If you think about your kid heading off to middle school, all of a sudden they're in charge of their agenda, they're in charge of all their things, their teachers are now expecting them to organize their own thoughts and self-start and all of these executive functioning tasks, and those are lagging at their biggest gap.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, number 2 is set our expectations where our kids are at, because that will reduce so much frustration for everyone. And then number 3, make sure you don't overschedule, because our nervous systems need time to chill. And in our lives these days, between school and all of the after school things, we overdo it all the time. And so often I'll ask kids, I'm like, so when are you doing nothing? Like nothing. Like I'm talking audiobook while you're kind of hanging half on your bed. I want you doing that.
Yeah.
When is that happening? And they're like, okay, I have 20 minutes between hockey and football. I'm like, nope, that's not enough. We need time to just stare at a ceiling or stare at a wall. And then the last one is, okay, where I'm at 3. So then after we've kind of decreased our schedule, number 4 is to start implementing ADHD specific strategies, things like routines, things like visuals. Visuals are amazing for ADHD, movement tools, all of the strategies out there. There's tons of supportive strategies that can be really helpful. But before we even get to those, let's understand, let's connect with other parents, let's get the nervous system to calm down, and let's make sure our expectations are appropriate. Then start implementing all of these great tools and strategies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if you're like, I'm going to take on a new strategy while your nervous system's like,
nobody can take that. And when you're implementing strategies, like for example, visual calendars are wonderful. One strategy at a time. We implement one strategy at a time. The whole family adjusts, and then we can try something else.
Yeah.
We don't throw everything at once. And I see that all the time. And a parent will come to me and they'll be like, well, I'm doing all the things. And I'm like, well, when did we introduce them? All at once.
Last week.
Like, last week. And I'm like, okay, let's slow everything down. So let's regulate, let's understand, let's connect, let's set appropriate expectations, and then slowly over time, build strategies into life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has it been like the best strategy for your life? Like what have you picked up over the last few years that changed things for you?
Well, I think one of those really is slowing down. I think pulling my oldest out of school and also just giving her lots of time to chill. I think putting less pressure on myself as a parent. Sometimes the learning curve is slower, but then it kind of goes at a different pace with ADHD, I find, especially working with lots of ADHD kids. We have parents panicking that they're not reading yet, and then 2 years later, they're reading all the things. And so sometimes giving space for development to catch up, continue exposing, but not feeling like a failure if it's not working yet. Reducing demands and battles. Like my daughter wanted to quit piano. We let her do that. But we needed another instrument, so she picked up the ukulele. She's now amazing at the ukulele, practices it herself all the time, joined an ukulele jam session where everyone else was over 50, which was awesome, and is now wants a guitar for Christmas. But she just kept showing up to her lessons without the pressure to practice, and then now she does it on her own. So sometimes just giving space for kids to figure it out on their own and allowing that, which is so hard for us as parents. And then some of the actual tools and strategies, like my kids, they love their time timers. They really help. And the visual calendar on the fridge so that they know what's coming and what's happening. And so some of the tools have been awesome and have made big changes. But I think, overall, just slowing down and reducing pressure on myself and my kids.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing to remember, because again, with the content we consume, with the culture we live in, again, things move so fast. again, throwing back to the ancient civilizations just for fun, they didn't have bottomless media. They could, it's not like, oh, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. No, no, you had time to listen to the birds, listen to the wind.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important part of the human experience that isn't just lost for ADHD people.
Oh, for everyone.
For everyone. But with the ADHD, there's that thirst for more that sometimes might.
Yeah. Well, and then parents go down the research rabbit holes. And even the way I designed my online parenting course, it's like the first module is just understanding.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing. That's it. And then the next module is just like connection, movement, and setting appropriate expectations. That's it. And then strategies. And you can do those in whatever order you want as you need them over time. Yeah. But it's like, let's just back the train up and just learn for a while. It's okay. It's a marathon, not a race. Yeah. Our ADHD kids are going to have ADHD their whole lives. Our goal is not to have totally independent humans at 11 years old. It's like by the time they leave our homes, we want them to be able to understand and advocate for themselves and to help themselves to be able to thrive and remember to brush their teeth and wash their hair and do all of those things when they leave our house. But that's not till 18.
Yeah.
We don't need that at 11 or 12. It's okay if they still need support.
Yeah.
And my favorite parenting mantra is this is normal and expected for my child. So when you're 12-year-old with ADHD, you still have to remember to remind them to brush their teeth. Yeah, that's normal and expected. I don't think I have any 12-year-old clients with ADHD that remember to brush their teeth consistently. And so I think for parents, that's a big piece is just like, it's normal and expected for my child. It's okay. Yeah. This doesn't mean that they won't be doing this at 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So if people want to learn more about the work you do or work with you, where should they go to find you?
I am on Instagram as Behavior Coach, spelt the Canadian way with an OU. And I'm also on the School, SKOOL platform. My community is called Chaos to Calm. And I also have a website, which is just NielsenMahoneyCoaching.com.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's been lovely chatting today.
It's been lovely to chat with you as well.
Okay.
Cool.